Good morning, Bananimators! Today we're going to be doing some overlapping and follow-through action. I'm so bad with terminology. I'm looking at follow-through and overlapping action, using like the old Disney definitions of what that means. So I'm basically just going to put some tails and stuff on this heart, and we're going to play with that idea with something like attached, like a ponytail or a cape, things of that nature. And part of the reason I thought I wanted to do this is because often tutorials say like how to animate hair, how to animate dogs, how to animate whatever, but that's not the type of tutorial you should be looking for to learn how to do this yourself. What you want to do is think about all the things that go behind these ideas and not have somebody tell you the answer, because if someone's always telling you the answer, you're never going to figure out how to solve the problem on your own. So what I want to do today is just talk about the things you think about when you're doing follow-through action or like an appendage attached to an item. So that way you can attach anything to any of your items and have an idea of where to start at least. So I've already animated a little stick because I was kind of thinking about how I wanted to go about this. And the stick, we've got some situations here with the squash and stretch, which I need to counter animate. Ideally, when you're animating an item like this, you would have in mind that there's going to be something attached, and you would have it prepared ahead of time so that you're not going to squash and stretch the item itself. That fixed the squash and stretch a little bit. But when you have something like a stick, this is quite a floppy stick. Like, it's not really penetrating into our heart. So you want to think about how tightly it's connected here, because if this had absolutely no animation on it, let's add another thing like this. So one of these is very loosely connected and it's kind of flopping around in there. And you can see the squash. Whoa. Calm down, squash. Should have made a new jump instead of mucking about with this nonsense. All right, so if you have a javelin speared into the side of your heart, you had a rough day, I guess. It's probably going to be somewhere between this. The floppy one, it's loosely connected. Maybe it's attached by a hook or a chain, and it's being pulled along. And the other one has no sway. Like, it's completely embedded in the heart. So that's the first thing you want to think about when you have something attached like that. What is the actual connection to the item? So if you have a ponytail, it's very firmly rooted to the hair. And then the hair kind of has its own floppiness, but it's very firmly rooted. Whereas something that's hung on a hook, like if you have a hook, like a chain of keys or something, that's got a little bit of like dangliness that's going to affect how it's going to be moving. The next thing you want to think about is the material that you're using. So in both of these cases, these sticks, I could say they are not firm anymore. Right now, it's like a very firm piece of wood has been embedded into this poor little heart. I'm going to just duplicate it so that I can have a side-by-side comparison. So this one, instead of a very firm rooted thing, or very firm wood, I'm going to have a flexible one. I'm going to use a deformer because I'm being lazy. There we go. So each of them now has its own deformer. Let's do one at a time. Do this one first. It's very firmly javelined in here. So as this comes down, it's being dragged from this point, but this point, because the wood is going to be flexible, is going to be delayed. Here's some stickers. As I pull it up and down, the end farthest away from the anchor is delayed. It just takes a little bit longer because you can think of it, the pull is starting here and it's radiating out until the end finally gets a chance to get some of that pull. So let's see, this is the very highest point. So we want our heart string here, our little flexible thing. And this is when we think about how flexible is it? Can this be like bent this much? Because then you're starting to get into something that looks very fabric-y, right? So let's just return it to its location. Let's just make this a little bit, because it's so firmly embedded, I don't think something very floppy would look as good. And then as this pulls down, this is still on its way up, because over here at the end of the cycle, the heart's on its way up. The tail hasn't quite come along for the ride yet. So this is still going up a little bit. This is going to be dragged a little bit more, and we can straighten it out. And we'll say that this is where it's getting to its like straight position. And then as it gets pulled, it's going to bend out the other way. You can always just think about this wants to just hang back a little bit. So you can look at where it was previously and lead it towards there. So now as this is coming down, this is being pulled. This isn't being pulled as fast. It can start to come around. But then when it comes up, this is still, it was on its way down. And now this part here is pulling it this way. So you can see how much downward momentum does it have. If it has a lot, if it's really coming slamming towards the ground, you can pull it down much, much farther. But because this thing is, we're trying to keep it a little bit rigid, not too flexible, that feels very bent. Instead, let me just make sure this stays. There we go. Don't want it to get too long. That's one thing that deformers, there's a very big danger of it. So I think I'm just going to have it come a little bit past, a little bit down here. And then as it's being pulled up, this is being left behind. It still wants to come along. I mean, it's connected, but it's being delayed. And as it's kind of floating towards the top, this will have a little bit of a chance to catch up. So this is when we have to reconnect to our cycle, which is a pain in the behind. Boop. So as the heart is starting to settle, our thing's going to start to spring back to where it belongs because it's rigid. Let's have that even closer to where we had it before. Even now I'm thinking maybe I didn't make it rigid enough. Okay, so it's starting to look a little bit more like a flexible tail rather than a stick that's jammed in the side. I think that's okay. And my length has kind of gotten a little bit higgledy-piggledy. All right, so if we take this same item, because remember that this was the same drawing with the same pivot point and stuff like that as this guy. So what I can do is just replace this with the peg there. And now we have our more floppy tail that isn't rigidly connected to our item. So you can see there's a huge difference. And now we're having problems with it, like slamming through the ground plane. So this is something we can adjust for, right? So now we've got it, it's loosely connected here and it's flopping a little bit. So it's going to hit the ground and it can't go through the ground. So it'll actually drag along the ground. It's a little bit too much, but it's got a little bit of spring to it. So it's kind of coming back up and around. All right, so you can see the difference between the two of them. But this one is, you have the rigid guy, rigid connection, rigid form. You've got rigid form with a loose connection. Over here, we've got a little bit more of a flexible form with a flexible connection and a rigid connection. That's kind of the things you need to think about when you're doing this stuff. Anything that you're animating. And we can even like think about adding, like making this super flexible or like a ponytail or something like that. You've got even more things to think about. But for the very basics of it, this is what you want to think about. How is it connected? What is it made of? How flexible is it? How heavy is it? So some of the most common things you're going to be doing in overlapping stuff like this is hair. And I like to think about 3 different kinds of hair. You have straight hair, which can break apart, okay? So here, as your hair is falling, someone's hair like that, it's very straight, and depending on the style of the hair is going to determine these shapes. But you can think of it, it can break apart very easily. Like the people who are in hair commercials, they like pull their hair up and it falls gracefully in many different pieces. That's not what my hair looks like. That's why I have no hair. But these pieces are going to have their own follow through, and they're quite flexible. Straight hair, it can break up into many different forms, and it's almost like water. It flows really well over forms. So that's one type of hair. And in that case, you would have a much looser form, but your hair is rooted quite firmly to a place. You don't want to go too crazy with the connection, or else you end up with something that looks like, well, I mean, unless the person is doing something like really insane with lots of effects and they're like, nah, then you probably want to chill out at the connection. You want to give it some heft so that, you know, keep it more along this line, so where you have an overall form and it's breaking up as it's moving in this direction. So as the character is moving backwards, their hair is going to come forward, and chill with the this part up here, but like a little bit down here breaking up is going to be good. So the second type of hair is curly hair, which is what my hair usually looks like. I've got that Weird Al Yankovic hair. And then you've got pieces. So you've got a hair piece, a hair piece, a hair piece, and it's going to move in pieces. Like it's not going to have this stuff happen where you really have a lot of different pieces falling apart and like you're getting a lot of new shapes. You're going to have like the coil of each hair act as like a little unit. The curls they're wrapped around themselves. They can't just loosely come apart like that. That's not how curls work. And this also, you got to look at the character's design. So oftentimes you'll have a character who does have straight hair, but then they have these little hair units like this. So this big hair unit might break up into pieces. This is like not quite Katara sort of stuff. But then this piece might come along, and that's going to act a little bit more like curly hair, these hair units. And then you have coily hair like this, which is going to act like a big unit based on its parting. So if someone has just a big afro, then it's going to move as a unit. It's flexible, it's soft, it's going to move around. Or if they have something like cute little hair buns, then this and this are going to move as a unit. And that seems a little bit straightforward, but once you get, like, the farther you go towards straight hair, the more detailed and difficult you can actually make things for yourself. Another thing is tails. Here's my cat, which has its own tail. The tail has bones in it, it has muscles, it can do what it wants. So you might start thinking about this, but you also have to think about what the cat is doing with the tail. That's another thing you have to think about for follow through. Does it have a mind of its own? A tail does. What is it doing? What do cats do with the tails? I don't know. I don't have a cat. If I had to animate one, I would go watch a lot of cat videos. I would look up cat tails. There's probably people who have an entire science based on the animation of a cat tail. Dog's tail, they're going to be wagging it if they're happy. So if they're running and they're happy, their tail might be wagging, and this kind of stuff is not going to come into play because the dog's tail is independently moving from the action that it's doing. It might have a bit of a response to that, but it also has its own opinion of what's happening. Arms are the same thing. So you have your arm coming through like this. It's not a super good arm, but the lower arm has the option of coming up whenever it wants, regardless of whether they're walking or not. Okay, so you've got your little regular swing, but then it also has the option of doing something else. Let's see, what else do? We do a lot of capes. Capes do not move independently unless it's like in the wind. So you've got like the superhero just like, nah, and then their cape is blowing in the wind, right? So when you have something that's bigger like this, again, you have to think of this connection. So is it pinned in two places? Is it pinned in the middle? That's going to make a difference, because if this has something shoulder pinning, then it's going to be coming from here. And the wind is bringing it this way. And then again, if you have hair, you want to think about if it's straight, sort of shiny hair, it has the option of being broken up into a lot more pieces like this. Let's give you a skirt. There you go. Now I'm just having fun drawing this character. But we're going to do some shoulder pinning. If it's a neck pin, then your items are going to move along from these neck pins. But it comes back to this thing right here. So this is where it's pinned. It's very firmly pinned there. And then you have the fabric coming out, and it's flexible. Fabric is quite flexible. We're going to animate this cape. Here is our thing. So we have the wind is coming along here, so it's going to bring it up. But everything is going to come back to this point. This isn't flexible, if that makes sense. And then the wind is coming along here. We're going to say that this is coming up as well. And these pieces, each sort of tube, you can think of its own little thing. So here we have underneath here is going to come up. It's going to follow. But the bottom of the cape, because there's weight to the cape, let's say that the bottom doesn't come up as much because it's being dragged, but it's always heading back to this pin. So this line here, you want to think about where it's going. It's coming down behind the character, And you want to have your directions of all these pieces make sense. So this side over here might be coming towards this one. Maybe it even has a back pin. So, and then we're going to have it come up. This part here is not negotiable where it connects. And this was going to this. And then we think about the stretch in between. And for fabrics, this is something like that you need a whole course in your brain. You make your own course or you find a course on fabric, because the material that this fabric is made out of is going to determine how flexible it is, how much it wants to fall back towards the ground. Okay, so right now I'm having it sort of fold over itself a little more. Here my corner, here's my corner as it falls, and it's catching sort of an air pocket. This will have sort of hanging up a little bit longer, and we can have it fold because it's fabric. And then here's where things start to meet up. I'm gonna just chill that out. The wind again starts to come up here. So the wind's picking up the top part, but the bottom part is still falling. The wind is coming in over here, and it's going to push out along the thing. Here again, we need to think about the material that we are animating. If you have a porous material, something that has a lot of holes in it, it's not going to catch the breeze the same way that a parachute is going to catch the breeze. Because a parachute's literally been designed to catch these big pockets of wind, and that's going to make a difference in how you animate it. Always remember where our anchor points are. Always heading back towards those anchor points is going to kind of protect us from ourselves and give it, even because with a fabric that's moving quite a lot, you have a pretty flexible thing. But if you have anchors, you have a place where it's always going back to, it's going to feel a little bit more confident, even if it's not very confident. So this is 12 frames per second. And you can see, because even though this is super rough and things are a little bit higgledy-piggledy, because they're always heading back towards that anchor and you have a confidence in where the cloth is going, it's going to feel like it knows what it's doing, because you're thinking about the anchor point, you're thinking about the type of fabric it is, where the forces are coming from. Like here, as I said, the wind is going to start here, where that arrow is. The air is pushing this way, and it's going to move along the fabric in like a little bubble. So your air comes in like this, and it's going to start pushing, boop, filling the fabric here, filling the fabric here, filling the fabric over here, and then it's pushed out the back. So you've thrown the air out, and then it's coming back down. And this one I want to put the little, give it a little bit, because I'm even thinking of the corner of this cloth and how the corner is being affected by the forces. Whee! Okay, we've got that big line is not pretty, all my little arrows. But you can see the little arrow being animated down the chain. That's showing you where the wind is coming. It's coming down through the cape and lifting it up along as it goes, like a wave. It's just like a wave. So if this was a very heavy velour, it would not push it nearly as far. If it was a very dense, like a parachute material, it's going to be picking up so much more wind, like a flag, with very firm connections here. If it was a flag actually has like a hole in it with a string that's tied to the thing. So you have to think about the connection to the thing. So the actual anchor point here on a flag, if you have a flagpole, you got some little strings. Stop that. You get some little strings, and then the flag is connected over here. Then this is a new element here. How heavy is this? Is it chain? Is it just a very thin line? Is it rope? How much give does it have? And it's going to inform your ideas about what you're going to do with that type of fabric. Okay, so that was a lot of things. But my goal here wasn't to teach you how to animate something. My goal is to teach you about what you're thinking about when you're doing these follow-through items, your capes, your hair, your jackets, little hair loopies, like Katara has little hair loopies. Those are going to follow, they have 2 anchor points. All this stuff has 1 anchor point. If something has 2 anchor points, it's going to move differently. If it's very heavy, a very heavy chain, which is made of firm links, is going to work very differently than like a soft yarn string. They're just going to work differently. The important thing to think about is, how is it anchored? Is it firmly anchored like this here, or is it loosely anchored like a flag? The material that it's made out of, if it's a very heavy cape, maybe it's a king and he's not going to be jumping from building to building, so he can wear something ridiculous like that. It's not going to catch the wind. It's very heavy and drapey, and it's going to drag along the floor. So you're going to deal with dragging animation much more than this like superhero cape animation. A parachute is going to catch the wind very well and hold that air. It's going to keep it, whereas something like a knitted blanket is going to let the air through the holes, so it's not going to billow quite as much. All of the different materials you're looking at need to be treated differently. So there's no one right way. It's about thinking about what it's made of, where it's coming from, what's affecting it, and that's going to start to give you the right idea on how to get this stuff looking real, looking like what it is. So that's it. I'm going to stop, because that's like 30 minutes of just me rambling. But let me know down below if you have any questions on this or other things. I love recommendations because I have no plan. Thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you in the next video.